ignorance is bliss suggests that if I don't know, then I feel better. But I think it's a lot truer to say that the more I know, the better I can adjust, the more joy and happiness I will feel. Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Seekers Podcast. I'm Adi Jaffe, and I'm so happy to be here with you today to talk about a topic that really came out of a client session that I had about a year ago at this point. And in this session, one of my clients was really struggling with what to do next, and I'll explain in a moment. You know, he was loaded up with previous knowledge and he just kind of wanted to erase it. He wanted to get rid of it. But he was faced with something that came up in that meeting, and he's actually Greek, so this works. There was a famous quote by Aristotle that says, the more you know you don't know. And I want you to think about that for a second, because what it tells us is that as you continue doing the work of learning, one of the main effects of that is going to be that you will keep understanding that you have a bigger and bigger gap in your knowledge, that there's more and more you need to learn, right? The more you know you don't know. We're actually writing an article about the opposite of this called the Dunning-Kruger effect. But for some people, this concept is really scary. You know, when you think to yourself of the ignorance is bliss concept, I think it comes from this. Because the idea is, if you don't understand that you don't know, then you have this magical experience of joy. Now, I'm going to make an analogy I haven't used before, because we're going to talk about The Wizard of Oz. Like in The Wizard of Oz, the book, the movie, whatever you watched, Dorothy and these friends that she makes, they walk all down the yellow brick road to find a wizard, an all-powerful wizard who can give them what they want, right? Can give Dorothy a way back home, can give the lion bravery, all that stuff. And they walk through all these adventures looking for this all-powerful wizard. But in the end, when the curtain literally gets lifted, right? The curtain literally moves aside, what they find out, the wizard was not at all that powerful. He actually couldn't help them at all. He was just a middle-aged guy who got duped into doing this job of pretending to be a wizard and was just talking into a microphone. What a disappointment, right? And my client, who was sitting on a couch in my office, I guess when we had this happen, it was almost a year and a half, 2 years ago. He had been sober in AA for 12 years. And then 6 to 8 years before he met me, he did what they call in the program. He went out. And it spiraled out of control for him. And then he got back in the program. And about a year or two before he met me, he was back in the program. And really, what he was looking for was somebody to create ignorance for him. He was looking for somebody to take away all the knowledge he had about what had gotten screwed up, everything he'd been taught in the program, etc., and erase it so that he could go back to using, which was what he really wanted. Now, what he was asking for was to erase knowledge, to get rid of what he knew about the world. He was hoping to get ignorance back so he could have bliss. And I see this with a lot of people. A lot of people see the fact that as you learn, you understand how little you really know. They see it as really scary or anxiety-provoking. They're really afraid of identifying that there are gaps in their knowledge. They want to know everything or know nothing, right? It's this black or white kind of thinking. But I think that that's a completely backwards way of conceptualizing this idea. Because for me, knowing that you don't know everything and that the more you learn, the more you'll understand you'll need to learn is actually one of the most ultimate ideas of presenting freedom in my life that I've ever had. And What I want to do today is present 3 points to you about the way that concept relates, in my opinion, to life, the way it relates to mental health and recovery, and the way that it relates to relationships that you have. Now, the way this concept relates to overall life, the freeing portion of this to me is that knowledge in life is a bottomless pit. You know, when Aristotle was making that statement, and by the way, I did not run this next piece by Aristotle. I tried to email him and just couldn't get in touch with him. So this is my projection of what I think he meant. What I believe he was saying to us is that the world of knowledge is endless. And the more you learn, the more of it you see. Right? Like, you walk into this dark universe and you know very little, and all you see is what's around you. And as you gain knowledge, the light turns on and you see more of the world. But then all that shows you is that there's more of the world to explore. And so as you walk into new corners, you light those up with new light. And then you realize there are more crevices and more areas for you to explore. You know, when I was young, I don't think I was the only one, but when I was young, I thought I knew everything. And I told my parents that all the time. I thought I was the shit. I thought I had everything figured out. Why? Because I knew so little that I didn't even have the perspective to understand how little I knew. That's why as teenagers, so many of us believe that we're so capable. We're so amazingly mature. We're so ready to take on the world because we're clueless. You know, when we're young, you think you're wise because you see so little of the world that you don't even understand how limited you are. I remember when I would learn any new fact in school, I would feel like I would have now this like well-rounded knowledge about something that happened. And sometimes I would have this conversation with my parents. The difference is my parents not only knew that story, like World War II, right? In Israel, the Holocaust, World War II, it's a huge topic of conversation. I would have one little new nugget that I would learn in school, and I would go talk to my parents about it. And I would think that I'm bringing this massive, new, important information to them. And they knew not only that fact, but also 40 facts around it that I had no idea about. Not to mention the fact that my mother came from a family of Holocaust survivors, right? Her mom escaped Poland at a young age and lost half her family. And so they saw what I said from a completely different perspective and understood it in a completely different way. As I grew up, as we all grow up, we get opened to learning more. And gradually you get to this place where you realize how lacking you are. If you're good about this, you realize how lacking you are. And that's when so many people get scared. That's where that ignorance is bliss phrase is the one that everybody uses to support this. Well, if I didn't know this, I'd have bliss. I think that's bullshit. Not only that, but I actually went out to look for the ignorance is bliss phrase. Where did it come from? And it's attributed to a 1742 poem by a guy named Thomas Gray, a Brit. And the actual sentence it comes from is this: where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. I'll repeat that again. Where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. So he's not saying ignorance is bliss in the world. He's saying when ignorance is bliss, it's not a great idea to be wise. What about all the times where ignorance is not bliss? I have to say, I really believe that is true most of the time, that ignorance is actually not at all bliss the vast majority of the time. I want to argue that most of the people who believe that ignorance is bliss are people who are already wise to the fact that it isn't, and they're just kind of being nostalgic for simpler times. Right? Like it's like one of those things that maybe couples experience a lot of times if they go through a tough moment. Like you're married maybe with kids and you're going through a really rough patch in your relationship and you think to yourself, man, life was simpler when I was single. But it really wasn't. And you're just being nostalgic. You're just doing the thing all of us do with nostalgia, which is you imagine how much simpler things were. I got to tell you, we say this a lot, right? How many of you have said before, man, life was easy when I was in kindergarten? But like, do you really want to go back to kindergarten? Like, is that the solution for what you're struggling with right now? Is going back to play in a sandbox and Like, don't you recognize how much more there is to life now? Wouldn't you much rather have the awareness you have right now than going back and being 5 and just playing with blocks? There's this quote by Rumi that I really love for this, and it says, "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I'm wise, so I'm changing myself." Nostalgia is nice. But back then you were also this egotistical, self-centered, narcissistic, nothing else exists but me kind of person. And now you know better. So not only is ignorance not bliss, ignorance is the inability to understand the purpose of what it is that you do here, your role, what matters and what doesn't matter, right? I think, again, we oversimplify things when we believe that somehow we're going to get this magical joy out of it. Now, in mental health and recovery, I think there's even a bigger role for this. Why? My client came in because he was loaded up with fear from all his recovery AA days. He'd been abstinent for a long time and then screwed up, got abstinent again, had been depressed for a few years while being sober. And really what he was looking for is permission for somebody to erase his memory, to give him back that ignorance so he could go back to drug use. He was hoping somehow to forget those years of learning so that he can act against all that learning. But the thing is that in his search for ignorance, he was actually missing the real point. Because what he wanted was not ignorance. What he really wanted was knowledge of self. Now, I know that because I've actually worked with that guy over the last 2 years, and I can tell you that by digging in, instead of erasing knowledge, he got to live a much, much happier life. You see, people are so scared of learning things that might hurt them or make them feel less than or weak that they'd rather learn nothing at all, even about themselves. Now, if you watch my TEDx or anything like that, I have a pretty big disdain for labels. And I also talk about my ADHD-like symptoms, but I had those for decades and nobody diagnosed me as ADHD. Now, you could say in some way that I was ignorant and then was blissful if you want to, but everybody else around me was affected by my ADHD. And while I was protected from the label and the knowledge that I had it, I was definitely not living my best life because of the behavior that I was displaying. Like, I missed meetings like you would not believe. I would triple book my friends, then skip out on all of them and end up reading a book and forgetting about the fact that I'd made 3 appointments. I pissed friends off, my family. I lost things left and right. I generally just performed horribly in every area of life that required planning and other people. Now, if you just leave it the difference between that and being not diagnosed with ADHD, you miss the point. Because it's not about the diagnosis. I don't actually believe in the diagnosis all that much. I believe in digging deeper beyond the diagnosis. Not staying in the shallow knowledge of yourself, but actually allowing yourself to bridge the gap between pure ignorance and full knowledge of self. Now, I leave the ADHD diagnosis behind, but I actually explore the full nature of the way my brain works, so I get to adjust. If you notice, I didn't say I have ADHD, I said I have ADHD-like behavior. There's a lot more there. I actually have some mirror of somewhere in between ADHD, OCD-like symptoms. Ignorance is bliss suggests that if I don't know, then I feel better. But I think it's a lot truer to say that the more I know, the better I can adjust, the more joy and happiness I will feel. Now, the last piece I want to talk about this is in relationships, because ignorance is bliss is probably the area where that came out of in the poem, because Thomas Gray's poem is like a pining love poem to somebody. And a lot of times people in the relationships and the couples that I work with come in with this belief that if my partner doesn't know, they'll be okay because, right, they'll have this blissful ignorance. But the thing is, not knowing makes nothing better. There are so many people that keep secrets for safety. So many people that live in relationships where they keep parts of themselves secret, hoping that by doing that, they're going to make it less likely that their partner will leave them or get turned off by them or figure out areas of who they are that they don't like. The thing is, if you live in this kind of relationship, you know what I'm about to say right now, and that is you get stuck behind this mask that you live in this relationship. There's so many examples. I mean, I lived through some of these myself, but I get so many of these examples from people I work with, like people pretending that they like certain kinds of food or certain kinds of music, or they enjoy travel or don't enjoy travel based on what the partner liked in the first place, and they wanted to impress them. But the thing is, then you're stuck wearing this other persona of the person who's vegan, even though you really, really like bacon. And then you're stuck in this conundrum. Because you know you're being disingenuous and you know you're hiding something from your partner. Now, by the way, sometimes it's much bigger than liking bacon, right? Sometimes it's about infidelity or money issues that you have or whatever. It could be anything, something from your past, like, in my history, having gone to jail. And as long as you don't tell the person you're with, yeah, they might not know anything, but there are two things that are happening. You're stuck lying all the time, and they're not really in a relationship with the person they think they're in a relationship with. If you've heard Sophie and I talk about any of this, you know that we believe radical transparency fixes all of that. And when I work with couples personally, or when Sophie and I do that work, or in this upcoming Save Your Marriage 6-month program that we're creating for couples who are really, really intent on creating the best marriage they can and are either engaged and about to fall apart or have been married for a while and are on the verge of divorce, I believe the opposite of withholding information is the best practice. Radical transparency fixes everything. Why does it fix everything? Because you get to be your best self. Your partner gets to know who you are, and then they get to make a real decision. Do I want to be with who you are, or do I want to go somewhere else? And then you get to be in a relationship that is honest and true, instead of one where you lie to yourself and to the people around you all the time. Now, I want to bring this back to The Wizard of Oz, because that was a powerful moment in the movie or the book, right? Finding out that the wizard is not all powerful, discovering the secret, the lie, can be a disappointment. Just like discovering that your partner likes bacon, even though they told you they're vegan, can be a disappointment. But it's only a disappointment if you don't also realize that it's within you to have the power to create the change that you want. It's within you to create the life around you that you pine for. There is no outside knowledge, there is no outside circumstance that can make that internal change for you. And so, yes, in The Wizard of Oz, the idea was, oh my God, look at the lie. I discovered a lie. How terrible. But once the curtain was pulled back and the truth was revealed, Dorothy found out how to get home. The lion got a bravery medal and found out that he was actually really brave, because look at all the adventures he just went through to get to the wizard. The scarecrow got a diploma and was able to prove that he had common sense and was smart. And the Tin Man got a ticking heart and showed that he actually really cared about others and had emotions. You see, the lie, being the wizard, didn't hold that power ever. But you had to discover that in order to understand that you had the power yourself. Ignorance was never bliss at all. Learning more created awareness, more joy, and better feelings of being complete in every single character in that story. And for that client that I mentioned, his desire to push away all of his memory and feelings and learning from the program by jumping back to drug use, that was one path. But a much better path, and the one that we took on, was to dive into why does he want to use at all? Was to dive into understanding himself on a much deeper level, so he's not trying to use drugs to numb out. Now, just to be clear, that was about 2.5 years ago that we started working together. He's been smoking weed for about 1.5 years, 2 years out of that, but he's doing fine and better, and we still check in, and it hasn't gone off the railing like it did in the first instance. So, what's the takeaway? What I want you to understand is this. Ignorance only seems like bliss for people who don't have it. The people who are ignorant either aren't aware of everything they're missing out on, or they're actually constantly trying to keep learning and improve. They're chasing the thing that you already have by saying that ignorance is bliss. The magic is here. If you remove your own need to be perfect from the equation and focus on the fact that the more awareness you get, It simply brings out more awareness that you will have in the future. You will go far. And this is true in life in general, in your recovery, and in all your relationships in life, in work, everything else. Now, if you do find yourself struggling, if you're in a coupleship that's struggling, this is probably one of the last weeks that we're actually taking applications for the Save Your Marriage program. And so we'll have a link down here at the bottom. And I want to urge you to understand this. So many of us, especially when we're going through a traumatic or difficult time in our relationships, at work, in life in general, we want to run. We want to get to the place of ignorance because we believe that in that we will have comfort and we will have safety. But you won't get it because the fact that you know that ignorance is bliss means you've already surpassed that stage. You're done. It's over. The only way you have to go now is forward into more awareness. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this has been enlightening for you and helpful. Do me a favor, screenshot this, share it with me. Let me know on Instagram, Facebook, anywhere else what really resonated, and send us messages about what more you want to hear about so we can deliver more of that for you. If you really like this, leave us a 5-star rating and review. I would love that. And maybe we'll read it on the Wednesday episode. Love you all so much. See you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you, so please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.